One of the limitations with our MySQL version of the photo sharing application so far is that anytime we want to do something with the server, we call this code to create a connection to the remote server, and then we call end on that connection. In a situation where our server is under heavy load with potentially hundreds or thousands of requests coming in, this will almost certainly exhaust the number of connections to the remote server and possibly overload our database server. What we'd like to do is have our web server sort of be able to restrict the number of connections to the MySQL server and indeed sort of manage a pool of these and sort of make people queue and wait for available ones when there is heavy load. The MongoDB driver we saw in the previous live lesson did actually have some built-in pooling. The MySQL one does not, but this is not at all a problem for us because we can use something here called the generic pool module. So we are going to use version 2.x of that, and let's go ahead and update our app for that. Or while we're waiting for that to happen, what we can do is we can go here and look at our db.js, which has now grown a little bit in complexity to support this pooling, but it's still not that bad. Effectively, what I'm going to do is I'm going to require the generic pool, and then I'm going to create an instance of that pool. The pool takes a name, and then it takes a function to create an instance of whatever you're pooling. So here we have a function that creates a MySQL connection, and then it also has a sort of destroy function, which we just causes us to sort of end the connection to the remote MySQL server. It also needs to know how many things it can pool and what the sort of timeout should be for those pooled objects. And so I've actually gone ahead and put that information in our local config file under DB configuration. So I've right now said that we'll allow up to 100 pool database connections, and they should time out after 3,000 seconds. So the init function here, what it does is it goes ahead and creates that pool, and then I immediately actually have it go ahead and do a quick query on the MySQL server just to sort of verify that the connection worked. And select one is very, very simple and just returns that value. The run MySQL query function, the way you work with these pools then is you acquire a connection from the pool, and it will give you one when one becomes available, or it'll create one if we haven't reached the limit yet. You do your work with it, and then when you're done, you call the release function. So the way it's going to change for us in our database code is instead of calling db.db and then the client, the dbc.end, what we're going to do is we're going to call the db.db as we did before, but then we're actually going to tell the db module that we're done with a connection like this, which will cause it to release it back to the pool. So let's go ahead and see that in action in our user.js file. So here, whenever I do db.db, you'll see at the very end when I'm done with it, now I'm going to say db.done, just to sort of indicate that we're done with it and it can be released back to the pool. So that's really the only change here to support pooling. The only other thing I need to do is in server.js, I kind of need to do like we had done previously with MongoDB, and that is before I start listening, I need to initialize our database subsystem and set up that connection pool. Otherwise, our application should work exactly as it did before. Let's make sure our database is clear. We'll run it. Let's fire up our web browser. And let's register a user. So I'll register emmettw.com, mark1, and great. Now I should be able to go ahead and add an album. Italy, it's Italy, blah, 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 blah. And now everything works exactly as it did before. The only difference is we now have sort of a connection pooling set up, which is great in a sort of more hectic environment where we're going to be sort of processing a lot of traffic.